Back to another episode of The Hard Truth. And as always, the hard truth is that hard truth that the weak refuse to accept, but the successful is embraced. And guys, we are so pumped because today we're going to have listen, I can't even call him a local icon anymore. He's starting to transcend the locality of Maryland. Now you see him speaking on stages and events all over the United States. I actually just DM'd him for his notes because he's so generous with the information they learned. He's like, yo, just DM me for my notes from his last CrossFit conference that he was at that was focused on health. And definitely some things I want to touch on there. But I have been watching and a fan of Dr. Josh Funk for a long time now, ever since he started in the same place that we started at, which was Fisk, and have absolutely watched you explode to now 10 locations. My understanding, I do believe all of those are corporate owned, meaning it's not even franchised. So you guys are just absolutely rocking out over there. So Dr. Funk, thanks so much for taking time with us today.
Danny, appreciate you, man. It's been awesome watching your journey and fortunate to still stay connected with you.
Where have you made it back home yet? Or are you still out at the conference you were at?
No, I'm home, back from Austin, Texas. It was good. CrossFit for Health. I think everybody can probably have their own perceptions of CrossFit and what it is, but they've done a really good job of emphasizing population health for a long period of time. And I really enjoyed it.
It's funny. So you was in Austin. I'm going to Austin actually week after next for a conference with GSD. So it's a good city to be in.
Hopefully the weather is better for you than it was for me.
Did you get a chance to go out and take the city in?
I did, but it was colder, rainier, windier, not nearly what I was expecting. But that seems to be, I've been at 3 other places this year for events, and the weather is following me around at this point in time. I don't know what it is.
Well, one of them was Canada, right?
Canada was last year. This year I've been in San Diego, Scottsdale, and Orlando. And San Diego,
you had bad weather in Scottsdale and San Diego.
San Diego, I don't know if you saw it. They had huge flooding, so the rain
started
there, and then they had huge flooding after. Scottsdale was like traditionally it was like 15 degrees below what it traditionally was, and rainy. And then Orlando, I think, was 10 to 15 degrees off their norm for this time period. So I've not gotten to enjoy any of the places where normally, if you're putting dots on the map, you'd be pretty excited about the weather at each of those places.
Well, it's just life balancing out all the good you got going on. You got to experience a little bit of the storm, so to speak. So listen, one of the things that I wanted to delve into with, just because, you posted about it recently, I've talked about it a decent amount, but you phrased a question that I'd never heard anyone say. And, I consistently tell clients when they come into Soldier Fit, like, listen, if you focus on strong versus skinny, we'll get you to the body and the goal that you want. If you focus on skinny, it's never going to happen. But you talked about, do we have obesity epidemic versus a midlife muscle crisis? What did you mean by that?
What we're realizing more and more is that focusing on weight loss is failing a large percentage of our population. The obesity and overweight prevalence continues to rise. And if it's continuing to rise, then are we approaching it the right way by, and I hate to use this phrase more, but we're so focused on fat. We're so focused on the phobia of fat and fat being very, very negative. And obviously it is with regards to visceral fat in particular. But if we approached this differently by focusing on adding muscle to an individual's frame, muscle almost being like an organism in itself with regards to what it can provide for us, produce in terms of our ability, and ideally have these hormonal effects that also occur as a result, should we be focusing more on solely, or at least more shifted primarily towards muscle building? And that's really something that's kind of growing. And, piggyback on Dr. Gabrielle Lyon would be the person to probably expose yourself to first. But she has a great book out there called Forever Strong. And she is pushing more of this muscle-centric approach to a problem that we have not been able to get a handle on.
Now, when we talk about muscle, I mean, I'm going to speak from my experience, and I'm curious, like, what type of advice would you give, especially to like trainers and people out there that are really, in the industry of helping people do body recomposition, helping people before they get injured, ultimately try to get track of their life. One of the big things that has literally been a plague since I started this over 18 years ago, women are I hate to use the word scared, but I can't think of a better word for it. Scared to get in the gym, on the weightlifting side of the gym, right? Everybody thinks it's cardio, cardio, cardio. Cardio is key. I think back to my mom growing up and her just Richard Simmons and everything sweating to the oldies, and it was like 2 pound weights, and so we had this stigma kind of where women are like, I don't want to get too bulky, and my thing has always been, if it was that easy to get bulky, there wouldn't be a skinny dude on the planet. Like every dude would be yoked up with muscle. But what approach would you take to females that are concerned about, well, I just don't want to lift too much because I don't want to get too big? And in an effort to shift that mindset from trying to cardio yourself to skinny to putting on the muscle for health and strength.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it maybe would be reframing what they're focusing on at the gym. And I think that this push towards strength, this push towards creating a more capable body, one that can perform at certain levels or perform certain feats. And that's where I think we get into a lot of challenges today with people is like, I'm working out, but I'm not seeing results, or I'm working out, but things aren't quite going the way that I want to. Well, what are you shooting for? And if you're just shooting for a number on a scale, I would largely, argue that you're probably maybe not ending up in a direction where you're getting anywhere. You're showing up, you're working out, you're sweating. You're showing up, you're working out, you're sweating. Weight's kind of changing, kind of fluctuating, but like, what are you proud of? And I think it's a lot easier to continue to show up when you look at a certain level of accomplishment, a certain amount of fulfillment. We don't like to compare ourselves, but let's say you just look at demographic norms for what a 35-year-old female can do and where you stack up. Like, why not benchmark yourself on your overall physical capability? Be more proud of in what you've created in terms of your performance, as opposed to solely a metric on a scale. And I think that a lot of women would probably suggest that, some of the athletes out there, let's take a track and field athlete or a basketball athlete or a soccer player. I mean, these are some of the probably more aesthetically pleasing women's bodies. So you have a fit body, you have an athletic body. Well, what are these fit and athletic women doing? Where do they stack up with regards to their physical capability, with regards to where you're at? How can you make sure that the focus still is internal on where you were with regards to those metrics, but at least shoot in a direction of which we know that by performing at certain levels and having physical capability, these women have, as a byproduct of what they've done, have ended up with the physique that they have.
And what is I mean, you talked about reframing earlier, and what a perfect way to put that. Like, what are you proud of versus what do you hate, right? Or what are you ashamed of? And, one of the things that I always try to tell the clients and stuff when they're doing this is like, listen, like, if the only metrics you're tracking, and honestly, it could be even if you only track one metric, that metric is always going to have a period of time where it doesn't move at the speed you want it to, or especially with women when we're talking about their menstrual cycle and how it shows up. Like, the reality is there's some days you may not perform to your best simply based on a phase that you're in. And if you're only looking at one thing, you're going to be disappointed. I do love the idea, and I never thought of it like this, of benchmarking yourself against other women that are in your demographic. The example of other 35-year-old women. Where would you recommend that people pull that type of information? What would be a good source to say, hey, well, this is what they typically do, and this is where I should be or aspire to be at?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that people often will probably agree with is that you feel proud of things that you accomplish. You feel proud of things that you accumulate. You feel proud of things that you are able to do. And I think when they start to correlate some of those things with health span, which is the direction that really this whole conversation goes in, it goes away from solely lifespan, but it goes towards focusing on, like, outside of you feeling good because you look good, what do you want your body to be able to do over the lifespan? Like, do you want to be able to run around with your kids later into life? Do you want to be able to be physically able when you have grandkids? Do you want to be able to go on vacation? And I hate to bring it up, but you're coming back from the airport yesterday and there's a whole family and they're barely able to, traverse stairs. They struggling with their luggage. And I can't imagine this family, unfortunately, because of a lack of physical ability. Now, some might, through outward appearances, look at them and go, all right, they're also overweight and obese. I would not disagree. But because of their lack of physical capability, are they going to be able to enjoy life? And I think that's where the conversation ideally gets reframed again towards, what are we physically able to do? How much of a baseline are we creating that's new? Are we creating a new baseline with regards to what we can do so that we can go on vacation and do a wide variety of different activities? Or do we turn into the parents that, because we can't do much, well, do you think our kids can do much on vacation? Do you think I'm going to be much as likely to go out in the yard or go out on a hike with my kids to allow them to explore the world? So there becomes this cascade of events that I think if we start having these conversations with people about what their body's ability looks like over the lifespan, it might also be a different way to get them to focus on the why. We have all of the what. We always talk about the why. And when I think about the demographic you're referring to, it's so that I can look good. So I can look good in a bikini. It's so I can look good when I'm going to the gym. So I can look good when I go out. But if we start to talk to them a little bit about an additional track of how they can view what it is that they're showing up for on a regular basis, you might end up in a situation where it's easier for them to buy in. It's easier for them to choose hard because they're in a situation where they're viewing the byproduct of these choices differently, which is health span.
What's crazy is I talk about pendulums, right? And you go back to the early 90s. I think I'm a little bit older than you, maybe a lot older than you. So maybe I remember it a little bit better. But there was this attack, like I remember being the attack on the Victoria's Secret models in the modeling world, because the focus was on just so skinny. It was clear like these young women were not healthy. Maybe they were dealing with some eating disorders to maintain this look. And so in an effort to like try to change that mentality, we went all the way to the other side and we talked about big is beautiful. And that's became this whole movement. And I've always tried to explain to people, it's not about beauty. Like that's in the eye of the beholder anyway. There's no debating, right? People always talk about going to the science. There's no debating that being overweight and especially being obese, they don't even call it morbid obesity anymore. They call it, I think, level 3 obesity because morbid was too bad of a word. How do you as a healthcare professional operate in a world where there are facts, but we're trying to mix feelings so much into those facts? Is that a struggle, or do you ever feel hampered to talk about it honestly?
I think it's challenging, and I think that the way to approach it incorporates the psychosocial components of an individual's well-being. How does a person feel about themselves? They can feel good about themselves, have a positive self-worth, but hopefully also be in a situation where they can receive information that is objective, that is communicating health status. And we don't want to communicate health status in a manner in which shames somebody. It puts them in a situation where their self-worth decreases. We want to provide them with the information that they need to live a better lifestyle. And ideally, that individual is able to separate the two. Hey, Danny is trying to provide me with the information that I need to be well. I need to understand that objectively speaking, I am at risk. My health is a concern. I am doing things right now that are shortening my lifespan. But he also cares enough about me to provide me with the resources, the time, the energy, the attention to live a better life and ideally move in a direction of which I am more healthy. I am extending my lifespan. I am extending my health span, because those are not the same thing. But if an individual who is in a situation where oftentimes if you're built more circular, you're going to have more visceral body fat. Visceral body fat is one of the single leading markers of reduced lifespan and most likely of having comorbidities. That is not something that we can negate. I know there are certain Hollywood people out there who like to potentially suggest otherwise, and sometimes that's where these narratives kind of go off the rails. But again, it leads me to suggesting we might be better off talking to some of these same people about their capability. What is your ability level? Through a 12-minute walk test, how far are you getting? How does that correlate with a VO2 max? Are you able to get to the ground and off the ground without using your hands? Knowing that that's also a marker for a reduction in lifespan. Do you struggle with skipping stairs without using your hands? How easy is it for you to get in and out of a chair without using your hands? Certain things that from a physical capability standpoint, we can tie that into being later in life. If you can't do X, Y, and Z, you become more dependent as a human. If you become more dependent as a human, you are going to be in a situation where you're going to be able to move less. You're not going to be able to do things in the world. You're not going to be able to do things with kids, with grandkids. The conversation then again becomes on building out competencies and capacities, which become less subjective, become less feeling, less looking in a mirror, less, I hate to say it, but some, the before after photos where people like are not quite sure, right? They're not sure looking at their photos or other things about. There's no doubt when somebody gets better on a 12-minute walk test. There's no doubt when somebody's able to get to the ground without using their hands or get off of the ground without using their hands. There's no doubt if we do things in terms of some test on a bike potentially, or if we're doing a test on a rower, a 500 meter row, a 2,000 meter row, like the capability that becomes the byproduct there. Let's dive into other markers as it relates to resting heart rate or heart rate variability. Those are things that become much more concrete for individuals. And again, it's like, does that bring about a sense of pride? Like, I would like to think that probably is going to make an individual feel better than solely focusing on an aesthetic metric that largely is in the eyes of the beholder.
One thing you mentioned earlier, I've never, I believe you might have heard the word, but it was definitely lifespan. I can't remember what you said versus health span or wellness span. What does that mean? Because I've never heard that before.
I could live to be 90, but I could have 20 years spent in an assisted living facility, needing help from others, and having a relatively, by a lot of people's standards, low quality of life, not able to really interact with the world, need assistance doing daily functions, getting out of bed, getting to the toilet, etc. What is the quality of that 20 years? Or do I have the individual who is able to live for the certain amount of time and they're able to maintain their independence as long as possible? Their 70s to 80s look entirely different. They're 85 and still able to walk through the neighborhood. They're able to still go and visit family, friends, maybe a particular vacation spot. But those individuals also most likely from a physical capability standpoint and their overall wellness also probably had such a high baseline during earlier years of their life where habits compounded for them, that it was a much slower, longer cliff because they were continually doing things to invest in themselves over time versus the individual who never really developed a lot of physical capabilities, who is closer to being dependent because they never were able to really do things with their body at a high level. And if I even, it's not even about weights. It's not necessarily even about running. It's just about like, a lot of it is how well you move yourself. And then what kind of cardiovascular fitness do you have? VO2 max and resting heart rate are probably two good metrics for people. And then the three that I mentioned already, getting to the ground and getting off the ground. Are you able to skip steps? And then the third one that I mentioned, getting out of a chair. But, can you get in and out of a chair using only one leg? The more that you can do those things, the less dependent you are later in life where, oh, shoot, I got to the floor and I can't get off of it. oh shoot, I'm in a chair and I need both hands to even, it's like a 1 RM getting out of the chair, or I never change levels because stairs are a risk for me, or it's extremely challenging. And again, it's a 1 RM for me to go up or down a flight of stairs. So, when people are younger in their life, they develop health span through pushing their physical baseline up as high as possible, and then continue to invest in their day-to-day with quality habits so that their
I feel like, and
decline
you shared
is long and slow.
You shared a slide from one of the presentations, and I'd seen this slide before, and it was basically showing muscle wasting, right, as people age, and it had this image. And what I've kind of drawn from all of this was that, a lot of people think that as you age, it's just inevitable that you have to deteriorate. But to me, it appears as if resistance training is the fountain of youth, and not negating cardiovascular training at all. Absolutely, cardio should be part of your program. But I do feel like within our industry, and perhaps within yours as well, there's a shift that the facts are starting to say that, like, listen, the be all end all isn't getting on a Stairmaster or treadmill and just going for 45 minutes 6 days a week. While yes, that's absolutely better than nothing, what we really should start incorporating is more of that resistance training. Is that a fair deduction of what's coming out in the industry?
Yeah, and I think again, it requires testing. It requires people being objectively benchmarked to give them better feedback on what they need to focus on. Some individuals have done so much cardio and gotten to a point where you might have the law of diminishing returns. Like, I'm doing all of this cardio and objectively speaking, only receiving a minute amount of quote unquote gains. So at some point, should I focus more on a different way of approaching cardio, or do less cardio and increase my focus on strength, because I know that I have sarcopenia and osteopenia running in my family. I know that based on objective benchmarks as it relates to my age and sex, that I'm also weak, comparatively speaking. So I would have a better idea of how to focus my time and energy. I would want to focus more on strength training. But there are some people out there that do focus a lot on strength training, and they completely neglect cardiovascular health. I hate to say this, but the middle-aged males walking around the gym that I typically go to look a lot like Johnny Bravo, where, we're doing a ton of exercises for our upper body, and we're not doing much with our legs, and we're also not doing cardio. So you talk about the two areas where we want to carve out health span. Like, great, it's great. You got chest on Monday and biceps on Tuesday, and chest on Thursday and biceps on Friday again. Like, can we find ways to objectively test ourselves so that as a 50-year-old man, I know that I'm needing to do certain things, comparatively speaking, to push my health span, to ensure that when I'm 80, that I'm in a situation where I can still handle things because of my physical capability. So it really, a lot of it comes back to the objective standing. How do we get objective markers out in front of people more? We're going to continue to try to do our best from a company standpoint. Just went through a situation in January where we pushed out 31 days of movement standards. But I think the more that we talk about these standards, or at least ways for people to benchmark themselves, the more that we can reframe these narratives.
And I think really, like, is it also kind of a mental shift in what, everybody always says, start with the end in mind, in that we're going to actually push the end to the end, right? What does 80, 90 look like for you versus what do you look like in a bathing suit this summer?
Agreed. And I think, getting back to your topic earlier about Victoria's Secret models, like, I hate to say it, but like some of the Victoria's Secret models, like, do we know the means of which that they went through to accomplish the physique that you're looking at? Like, are we looking at them 30, 40 years from now and able to objectively say that they're in a position that I would like to be in? A great example on the male side is like bodybuilders. There are bodybuilders that have ruined their bodies to do what it is that they're doing. I mean, look no further than, unfortunately, like Ronnie Coleman right now. Like his health is in bad shape. So is that potentially the best way to approach whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish throughout the course of the lifespan? Or do we need to look at like a Gabby Reese, who I think is in her 50s? For anybody that knows Laird Hamilton, like an example of people that just like, they're handling life well. They're still hiking. They're still surfing in their 50s. They're still, by all accounts, healthy and much healthier than a lot of their counterparts. So should we be looking at people who are further along the journey than us and unpacking their habits a lot more? Absolutely. Don't look at the right now. Look at people who are older than you and ask them what it is that they've done. And then for the people who go, oh, well, the people in my family are blankety blank, so I'm naturally going to be this as well. I would encourage you to look at epigenetics. I mean, the study on environment and the study on habits as it relates to genetic expression. So if you know that you have certain things that you have a tendency for, from a comorbidity standpoint, diabetes is in my family, or, we just don't have great knees or great back. Like, I would be then doing my due diligence and trying to learn more about how to safeguard myself, how to have healthier joints, how to better understand how certain foods and the way that I do things affects my blood glucose. So the information that we gain is more from looking forward and trying to follow the path of the people that have either avoided things that we're trying to avoid, or who are winning as it relates to the health span game.
One of the things that I think often causes problems for people is that a lot of doctors aren't healthy. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I don't see it as much in your industry. Like I was actually, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, you don't really, I honestly, even if I'm sitting here trying to think about it, I don't think I can think of an overweight or out of shape PT that I know of. Right. And I feel like you guys as an industry, maybe it's because maybe a lot of you guys come from athletics. I'm not real sure how that breaks down across the industry, but you guys are doing a really, really good job of modeling what you're talking about. We don't necessarily see that across the board when we look at, basic healthcare practitioners, and the people are going there and they're getting their blood pressure readings, or they're getting their lipid readings, or whatever they're pulling off of blood work. But the person talking to them clearly isn't in shape themselves, and they are, quote unquote, they are, but they're a doctor. Right. And so what type of effect do you think that happens to have on the population if a lot of the people that we're supposed to be going to for health advice are not healthy themselves?
Personally, I would get a new doctor, and that's just me. But I'd like to hear from people who are talking the talk and walking the walk. It's so much more authentic. I'm able to have a lot more trust in that individual, and I think, I definitely agree with you that it can be challenging. I mean, I can think of times where I was going through grad school and seeing healthcare professionals smoking cigarettes outside the hospital. That was something particularly challenging. But as it relates to PTs, I think that naturally you're going to see us shifting a lot more towards, I don't want to say primary care. We're never going to take the role away from primary care physicians, but with the improvements towards more and more direct access for PTs, we're going to be more at the forefront of some of these conversations, at least with regards to cardiovascular metrics, with regards to body composition discussions. I think it fits us very, very well because, as you mentioned, I can think of a majority of our staff is in the field because they were athletes, because they got injured. We also have to be on our feet for a large percentage of the day. We still have to be able to demonstrate certain things. There's a certain authenticity that speaks to what it is that we do on a regular basis. How can you be a physical therapist if you don't have a certain level of physical aspect to your life? And I always want to make it known, like, obviously everybody's got different levels of physical capabilities. There are certain considerations there, but the fact that we are being physical, everybody has, a different baseline, different considerations to work with. But the fact that physical activity is a part of our routine allows us to have better conversations here. The more I think that we're going through our own personal health journey, the more that we're being N=1, which is where we're doing self-experimentation, the more that we can communicate what that journey is like to other people. And I think moving forward, that really is a very, very important thing for everybody to do. Share your trials, share your tribulations, share what worked for you. Because at the end of the day, we're even realizing like stuff like cardiovascular exercise. We could have 40% of people be non-responders for steady state exercise with regards to the, 10,000 steps from a walking standpoint. If we have 40% non-responders there, then guess what? We better be able to potentially reroute individuals because they're coming to us and they're communicate that certain things don't work. If I have somebody that has, gastrointestinal or skin issues, I might, because of my own personal journey with things like colitis and eczema, be able to communicate things that I tried and potentially route them differently through the system. But I think largely when you have healthcare practitioners that don't exemplify health and wellness, or at least are able to show proof of product as it relates to them going through a journey, it becomes harder and harder for that individual to be able to help you out. They're not doing anything personally as it relates to their own personal health and wellness. Well, how can this individual help me if they haven't gone through just the process of self-improvement and self-experimentation themselves?
And you've touched on this a couple of different times about different capabilities for people. And I think a lot of times what people use as an excuse is, again, let's just say looking from the outside in. We look at you and your family, you all good looking people, right? You were a high level athlete yourself. Your brother made it all the way to the NFL, was like a local, like everybody was on the, the funk train then, making it to the Super Bowl, winning. And they look at guys like you and go, you know what? Yeah, Josh, but you just have it. You're just naturally that way. You just naturally handsome, naturally athletic. Like you don't know what it's like to be overweight or to be fat. And sure, that works for you, but it won't work for me. How do you approach those type of people that would look at it and just take everything on surface level?
I think it's easy to be dismissive based on things on surface level, but a better way of thinking for individuals who may have thought exactly what you're referring to is asking questions. Why not ask questions a little bit more? Why not kind of go like, hey, what did you all do growing up? Because maybe I won't have the opportunity, but maybe I'd like my kids to have a similar framework. Maybe there were certain things that, and yes, I had 5 siblings, all signed Division I national letters of intent. But you know what you won't hear there? We played 9 different sports growing up, at least. Like we played a sport every season. If you're playing sports every season, do you think you're developing a certain level of fitness? Do you think you're developing a certain level of mental framework as it relates to the art of practice? Do you think you're putting yourself in a situation where you can be coachable? Do you think you're learning how to self-regulate? Do you think you're, learning intangibles that also relate to success beyond an athletic playing field? I would argue, yes. Do you want to hear about some of the messaging that was communicated growing up? Do you want to hear about how we were focusing on non-outcome oriented things? How showing up to practice every day, being a good teammate, not worrying about statistical benchmarks, but more worrying about how we were being coachable, whether or not we were loafing at practice, how hard we were going in conditioning, the emphasis on effort over time, and what that led to. That might be something that, regardless of your genetic potential, you know what I can probably say as a result of a lot of these things? My siblings and I probably got very, very close to our potential. And doesn't a parent want that for their children? Doesn't an individual want that for themselves? So rather than being dismissive and looking at something as, oh, there's exceptionalism present, Could I potentially learn from a certain amount of quote unquote exceptionalism, unpack what it is that was similar through that journey? And here's why I say this, it's like, nobody knows that I don't share a full bloodline with any of my siblings. Like, if everybody wants to get into the science of it, I have half a genetic makeup with each of my siblings there. So where were the commonalities? If I didn't have 100% of the same bloodline with any of those individuals, well, you would have to argue that it was in the what we did, the way that things were approached, the way that things were communicated. And fortunately, there were some adults and individuals in there, or just some general structure and choices that was a commonality for all five of us.
So is it safe to say that you're a big believer in nurture over nature, or just in your case?
I think we can always take into account that, LeBron James is an unbelievable specimen. And there are certain things that a 6'8" or 6'9" human being is naturally going to be able to do differently than others. But guess what? There's a lot of 6'8" or 6'9" people that have been in the NBA. How many have been able to play at the level of LeBron James to the age of 38? Could other people around him look at some of the things that he's done over time to still play at a high level? Could we look at the person at our gym who's relatively the same age as us and look at what it is that they've done over time to get where they are and potentially pick up on that? Could we look at a situation that I'm referring to with regards to my siblings and look at the nurture aspect and at least say, hey, these 5 kids all had relatively same things going on for them as it relates to the structure of their life growing up. And this is how they all kind of maxed out their potential, at least from an athletic standpoint. Then we could get into the professional side of things, but that's a whole separate conversation as it relates to the intangibles. But nature, we can't change. Nurture, we can change. Why not focus on the things that we can control? Why not build out different for ourselves to try to create a new baseline, knowing that ideally we would like to not have yesterday's problems. We would like to not be in the same situation we were last month, last year, last decade. Control the controllable shouldn't just be a narrative. And if you're trying to live by our company totem, which is be greater than yesterday, then you're trying to do whatever you can to be a part of the nurturing of your own personal development and focusing on your own shortcomings or things that you were born with or things that fall in your family tree or genetic profile. I mean, even if we get into things that involve breaking generational curses aren't usually genetics. They're usually things that have habitually occurred over time. And at some point, somebody in the family says, enough is enough, and I'm going to break this curse. So if we want to do the same thing on a physical health level, well, let's look at if obesity has affected my family, how am I going to break the curse? Well, probably not by doing all of the other things that other members of my family would be doing. So, but then again, that comes down to a certain level of self-awareness. It comes down to somebody actually seeking out objectivity and seeking out a pathway of which is more difficult because it's not the one that they're used to.
And speaking of that, you have parents that they've been overweight, they've been obese, they've been unhealthy, they have low capabilities, and they have their children. And they're like, I don't want them to grow up like this. I want them to have it. And a lot of times, I was having this conversation with Zach about MMA. And obviously, a lot of people put their kids in martial arts. And you see these parents that have kids in martial arts, and they're like trying to teach the kid hard work and discipline, and that's part of the reason why they put them in martial arts. But then we see they're not doing that in their own life in a very visual way, right? And how important is it to you do you believe it is that if we want to actually see changes in our children, that we have to first actually demonstrate those changes in ourselves? And would you say it would be safe to assume that before I look, or at least in tandem with looking to help improve my child's health, I should actually be spending some time with myself?
Yeah, and it reminds me of the quote, and I'm going to credit Allison Monville over at Odin CrossFit, who you may be familiar with in Frederick, but a lot of people say they'll die for their kids. but why don't you make the choices to live for your kids?
Yeah.
Why don't you make the choices to allow your child to have a better life? Why don't you make the choices that your kid can be on vacation and enjoy all of the aspects of vacation? Why don't you make the choices so that your kid doesn't have to have the same struggles that you did? Why don't you make the choices that you need to make so that you can enjoy your kids' kids? So we talk a lot about all these narratives. Well, I'm doing X, Y, and Z for my kids. The number one thing that we should be doing is providing an example for them, showing them what this journey looks like. And it doesn't require us to have the outcomes that we hope our kids will have, which ideally is far beyond whatever we accomplished. But it just involves them picking up the habits, picking up the process, picking up the level of self-regulation, the self-experimentation, picking up the process of building new. Generationally speaking, like let's be as consistent as possible so that we're in a situation where our future generations are better and better and better, as opposed to having one great generation that happens based on, exceptional circumstances, and then the other one dropping down to the valley. And I think that, again, like just to revert back, like more people need to really think about how they're showing up and what this person is actually learning from them.
Awesome. Look, I'm gonna ask you as we look to close out. If you're talking to somebody and they're coming in, and they go, you know what, they've reached that point. They've said enough is enough. I think one of the biggest detriments for people is they look at, and they don't even realize they're looking at the pinnacle of the mountain. We look at things like a 225-pound bench press, right? And everyone looks at that and goes, "Oh my God!" I see people that bench 225, and they actually don't realize how exceptional that is when we compare it across the population. I think you're in like the top 3, maybe even 1% of the population if you can bench 225. And so, as much as I hate to admit it, gym intimidation is a real thing. Planet Fitness, that's probably maybe one of the best marketing lines that has come out in the last couple of decades. But how do we get these people outside of their mind that, like, listen, like, you don't have to bench 225, squat 400, deadlift 600 to be in shape. You don't have to be able to run a record marathon to be healthy. Like, as you said, with the R2P standards, like, what are we actually measuring against, and what should be the real measuring stick? How do you approach that with people to help get them on board with it?
I would try to build backwards using something that you mentioned earlier, build backwards from things that are meaningful to people in their everyday life. Talk to them about what it is that they want to do socially. Talk to them about what it is that they want to do with their kids. Talk to them about what 20 years from now they want to be able to physically do. Again, the physical capability of the human being. And then we start to be able to build back from that a little bit more. I would largely focus on 2 separate buckets. I would focus on cardiovascular well-being because we need our engine. Our engine supports us as it relates to being able to perform repeat efforts. And then strength allows us to have an ability to perform things with relative efficiency. When we have a certain amount of strength and capability over there, it becomes a lot easier for us to do these efforts. So we want to be able to do efforts repetitively, which is the engine that I'm talking to. And then we want to be able to make efforts very, very easy. So if we're focusing on the engine, things like a VO2 max, things like a resting heart rate, we could get into HRR, which is heart rate recovery. You could potentially look at your HRV to see how you're responding between your exercise bouts. And then on the physical side, with regards to strength, a lot of times we're going to be looking at like work capacity or strength endurance with some of the markers we have. So a lot of the tests we had were more for distance or more for the amount of weight that we were doing for a certain amount of reps. So I think of things that are very, very important. Start with your legs. Your legs allow you to interact with the world. That's why I kind of poked fun at the middle-aged man that, has the Johnny Bravo workout. Like, we need to do things with our legs that allow us to walk. They allow us to hike. They allow us to potentially do things at a faster level. They allow us to carry. If you can't walk, hike, carry items, you're probably less physically capable human being. So if you focused on those two buckets in itself, I think you would probably do really well with regards to matching up with a lot of things that people want to do outside of the gym. But you could get into more sports specific markers if you wanted to, but there's a certain amount of specificity that you don't need to focus on very early on. For the individual that's coming to you and saying, hey, I can't do much of anything right now, I would recommend those from a low-hanging fruit standpoint.
Awesome. I appreciate your time as always. Where do people find you and all 10 of your locations? Where can we get to learn more about Funk and R2P?
Yeah, you can learn about Rehab to Perform, and we're opening up our 10th office. It'll be 8 locations in Maryland, 2 in Virginia. That's rehabtoperform.com. The number 2, if you want to connect with me individually, at Dr. Josh Funk on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and feel free for the professionals out there to add me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. As always, brother, thanks for what you did. Hey, guys, if you got something out of today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share. And as always, remember, the first step to the storm should be your own, because there's always going to be another storm. And listen, I love the thing from Josh today. Like, why don't we get better than yesterday's problems? And I'm going to steal that. I'm going to share that with our team today. As always, guys, keep living your life head down, horns up. And until next time, salute.